Hello, everyone, and welcome to Slash Film Daily for Tuesday, March 5th, 2019. On today's episode, we're going to talk about what we've been up to at the Watercooler. This is Slash Film Editor-in-Chief Peter Sciretta. And joining me on today's podcast is Slash Film Managing Editor Jacob Hall.
Hello, hello.
Senior Writer Ben Pearson.
Hey, what's going on?
And writers Hoai-Tran.
Hey, everyone.
And Chris Evangelista.
Hi.
So Brad is not here today. We were not able to get the whole gang together for this podcast due to scheduling conflicts. He's on a work trip, but we can have a discussion without him. We don't need Brad. We the show must go on. Let's start things off with what we've been doing. First of all, I've been doing almost nothing this past week that's worth talking about here. I've been going to the Magic Castle, and nothing really of note there. So I'm going to apologize in advance. My contribution to this podcast is going to be minimal, but other people like Ben are going to be making up for it. So but let's start off with Jacob. What have you been doing this week?
Well, as I mentioned on the podcast yesterday, and as you may be able to tell from the less than ideal quality of my audio, I am not at home right now with my better setup and better mic. I am dog sitting for my mom and my sister while they are out of town. So that means my dogs, my sister's dogs, and my mom's dogs are all together in one house in San Antonio, and I am tasked with making sure they all get fed and that they all do not kill each other. And taking care of 7 dogs. I do this all the time. I'm the go-to dog sitter for whenever they can't find anybody else, because I'm cheap and I owe everybody favors. And being around 7 dogs at first seems like fun, maybe for the first 5 minutes, and then it gets really, really obnoxious, even when they're very cute. So here's my question for the crew. Do you want me to give each dog a report card right now?
Yes.
I think you have to.
Yeah, okay. All right, so first up, we'll start with one of my dogs, Jack. He is a Shiba Inu Rat Terrier mix. He is very territorial. He likes to be the leader of the pack. He's very, very much the dog in charge when he comes here. He likes to assume control. He likes to make sure that he's always the closest to me. He tries to make sure he's always the first one to get fed. But he's also very sweet. He doesn't actually pick fights. He's sort of passive-aggressive. But that passive-aggressiveness is very annoying, so C+.
I didn't know you were going to be giving, 1 minute long reviews of every one of your dogs, Jacob.
All right. Next up is Carl, my other dog. He's a Basset Hound Springer Spaniel mix. He's been so sweet. He is the goodest boy. He likes to avoid conflict. If there's dogs in his spot, he will walk away and sleep somewhere else. He's an A+. He is perfect. Next up is Spencer, one of my mom's terriers. He is this chubby little thing that growls at everything but never acts on it. He's perfectly fine, but if you get into space, he makes this really awful growling noise. It seems super aggressive until you realize he's not going to fight, which means he's just a jerk. C-.
That sounds like Gizmo. My dog, my Pomeranian, will make these noises that it sounds like he's going to rip your face off, but it's all bark, no bite.
Yeah. Next up is Murphy, my mom's other terrier, Spencer's brother. He is a lump of a dog. He sits there and misses my mom and does nothing. He doesn't play, he doesn't growl, he doesn't fight. If you don't feed him separately from the other dogs, he'll eat his food, literally steal his lunch money and eat his lunch before he can get to it. He gets a D for being a bad dog who doesn't know how to dog. Next up is Molly, my mom's full-bred Basset Hound. She's beautiful. She's a great-looking hound. She has everything you want out of a hound. She has gotten ornery as she's gotten older, and she likes to play fight in ways that other dogs take more seriously than she does. So she gets a B- for being a generally good dog, but she just likes to play fights with dogs who don't want to play fight, want to fight back. B, my sister's Yorkshire Terrier, the terrier who can fit in the palm of your hand. She's friggin' awesome. I want to steal her. She has the personality of a giant dog in a tiny package. A+. Does not start fights, does not take shit. Finally, my sister's Corgi, Lily. She is the worst dog I've ever met in my entire life. She is aggressive. She is mean. She picks fights. She is needy. I've had to break up conflict between her and all the other dogs, so she keeps on starting crap. And I've since learned that female corgis are much more territorial than male corgis. So if you ever heard stories about corgis being great dogs, because it's boy ones, female corgis suck. F. Lily gets an F.
So basically what we've learned here today, Jacob, is that your dogs are better than the other dogs?
Yes.
What other podcast can you get reviews of dogs?
Only Slash Film Daily.
Only Slash Film Daily.
And the Dogcast.
Yeah, the Dogcast. Jacob, you've been prepping for South by. That's happening, later this week?
Yeah, I'm literally leaving my mom's house on Friday morning, driving back to Austin and back and right into South by. I'm driving to go pick up my badge, do a couple hours of prep, and then I'll be going straight from this into that. We have some of the major premieres we've confirmed tickets for, so you'll be seeing coverage for sure from a few of the major movies, which we'll talk about, early next week as we see them. But we're hoping to find some of the big discoveries and stuff. But we'll definitely be seeing Us opening night, and we'll be seeing Good Boys, the Jacob Tremblay comedy, the R-rated Jacob Tremblay comedy. Those have been locked down for sure. So look for reviews and coverage of those as part of the first few days of the fest.
Very cool. HT, what have you been up to?
This past weekend, I visited the MoMA, the Museum of
Modern Art?
Modern Arts. That's what I was. Yeah, it's been a long day. Museum of Modern Arts. My friend has a New York Library card, which recently, I think as of last year, will get you for free into the Guggenheim, various museums around New York City that are participating in the Culture Pass program. So she had an extra ticket, and we went together, and it was a lot of fun. I have been to the MoMA, I think, once before, but it was a while ago, maybe like 5 or 6 years ago, but it was really cool to see it again. The current exhibitions that we saw were the Joan Moreau Birth of the World exhibit, an exhibit called Long Run, which was sort of about economic and political statements, which were a little bit on the harrowing side. There's one sort of series of photographs, or rather paintings of photographs that were of executed political activists, and it felt a little exploitative. I wasn't a huge fan of that, but I liked the rest. I liked looking through the entire museum, as well as the regular collections. I actually had forgotten that Vincent van Gogh's Starry Night painting was in the MoMA, so I was very excited to see it. And yeah, it was a good time. Just spent my Saturday walking around looking at fine art, and my friend and I kind of tried to, I guess, make a game out of it and guess what the meanings of these paintings were. And we'd always say, "We're so good at art" at the end. So I'm great at art, guys. Yeah, that was a lot of fun. That was kind of my little Saturday outing, and I also recently guested on Slash Filmcast to talk about my favorite film of 2018, Shoplifters. I was very defensive in the review of it. I might have gotten a little bit overly defensive because not everyone was quite as keen on this film as I was, but you can check that out at some point this week on slashfilm.com.
I love the Slash Filmcast, but they are overly critical. I was listening to their episode last week for How to Train Your Dragon, The Hidden World, and I feel like it was just too nitpicky about stuff. I'm not saying that movie is a perfect movie. It does have some problems, but I don't know. I feel like sometimes it feels like they're not enjoying it to the fullness of their ability. Yeah. Anyways, Ben, what have you been up to?
Well, as you may know, my wife and I went to Iceland last year. I talked about it on an episode of the Watercooler, and we finally finished our sort of recap travel video. And this is the first one that we made that we shot a lot of the footage in 4K, and we've done that for previous videos, but this is the first time that we exported the final file out as a 4K video. So I put that up on YouTube. We finished that this past Saturday. And
wait, does that mean a lot of extra rendering time?
It actually wasn't as much. I was expecting it to take several hours to render, but because the video, the final thing is only 6.5 minutes long, it wasn't really that bad at all. It probably took less than 30 minutes to render the whole thing, which was a big surprise to me. But just the video quality is so much better, and we just got a 4K TV, as I talked about last week. So being able to watch the video on a huge screen in sort of the format that it was intended, it was pretty incredible. And YouTube obviously doesn't look quite as good as the the native file on my hard drive or whatever. But I'm still pretty pleased with the way that it looks on YouTube. So I dropped that in the show notes, and you can check that out. It's full of all sorts of pretty awesome looking stuff that we did. I mean, watching it back, it's hard to believe that we did all this in 5 days. We just crammed so much stuff in, like one thing after the other. There's like hidden waterfalls and snowmobiles and all sorts of insane stuff. So check that out if you are interested in Iceland.
Yeah, I think there's a lot that people could learn in creating vacation videos from your video, Ben. Number one, it is short and to the point. Like, I think a lot of people want to fit too much in, and you got to the essence of your adventure in 6 minutes. And also, the cinematography is just, like, on point. Like, I after seeing this video, I, like, want to hire Ben and Amy to, like, follow me around for a vacation to make it look like an adventure of a lifetime. Because, like, it looks like, you know, an epic adventure. Yeah.
Yeah, and I just want to give a quick shout out to Amy as well, my wife. She's awesome, and she was like, you know, right there with me the whole way, you know, shooting and editing the whole thing. So I don't want to make it seem like it was just me. It's very much a team effort. So shout out to her.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, let's move on to what we've been reading. This past week when I've been going about, I've been listening to an audiobook of a book that came out last week from author Ian Frisch. It's his book that's called Magic is Dead. And this isn't a magic book, but it is a book about magic. This is a book that, you know, is widely available and came out last week. And, you know, if you go to your local, like, Barnes & Nobles, it'll be, like, in the new book section. This is, Ian Frisch is a freelance writer. I think he writes for, like, a lot of big publications, like, I don't know, like Esquire, Playboy, stuff like that. And he, for an article, embedded himself in, like, the underground world of magicians. There's this whole group called the 52, which until this book was actually not something that was really publicly talked about. It's this kind of a private group of magicians that you have to be asked to join. They each have a tattoo of a card on their middle finger. And he embedded himself in that, and he was originally going to sell it as an article. And it actually, I think his editor at, I think, Playboy or something didn't want it. And it ended up continuing, and it ballooned into a book that he sold. And this book is an interesting look at this, like, secret society of magicians. It gives you a good look at what is going on in the magic world today. It features many of the people that I follow, some people I'm friends with, some people that I watch from afar on YouTube. And it's actually kind of very weird to, like, get a narrative story that features these people that I watch on YouTube, you know, almost daily. It's like as if I guess it's if you watched a movie about the people on this podcast. Do you know what I mean? If you're listening to this podcast, it's just such a weird experience. I'm not sure who this book is for, because a lot of this I feel like is stuff that most people who are practicing the art of magic probably do know. It doesn't dive too deep, but it is an interesting story. It's kind of like I guess. If anybody's read, like, Neil Strauss's The Game, or, like, I guess Fight Club, it's like an introduction to, like, kind of the secret world kind of thing. It's kind of in that vein. It's well written. I'm just not sure if Muggles are going to be interested enough to read a look into the secretive world, and I'm not sure if magicians are going to gain anything out of this, but I really enjoyed it. And I guess I am a magician, so I guess that answers my question. So that is Magic is Dead, My Journey into the World's Most Secretive Society of Magicians. I'll link it in the show notes. Jacob, you've been reading a lot this week.
Yes, I made the conscious decision that while I was away dog sitting, I'd try to get through as much reading as possible, both books and comics. So first of all, I finished Lovecraft Country by Matt Ruff, which I first mentioned last week. This is the book about black characters in the 1950s dealing with a very traditional, in many ways, weird fiction story of cults and monsters and ghosts and all kinds of magic, good and evil. And it's a really, really excellent read. I love how each section of the book, I think there's 5, it feels like a different genre of weird fiction. You know, the cult story, the science fiction story, there's the sort of possession story. There's a haunted house story, and each one is centered around a different character in the book, and they all sort of offer different perspectives on the story, and they all come together in the end in a really satisfying way. And as someone pointed out on Twitter, and I would be remiss if I did not bring this up here, one of the lead characters in the book is the writer for a travel guide for Black Americans traveling in 1950s America, and it does more the concept of a Green Book or the Green Book than the movie Green Book does. This horror novel tribute to old school pulp weird fiction. It's also a commentary on racism in America. Actually has more to say about how the Green Book was important to Black Americans than the movie Green Book. So it's actually a really, really fascinating book to read at this time. And like I said, that's becoming an HBO series at some point this year if things go according to plan. So look out for that. But read the book first if you think that sounds cool, and it really is a great read. I also reread for the first time since high school Pet Sematary by Stephen King. I am preparing for the new movie. It's playing at South by, so I'm planning to catch it there. But I want to refresh my memory on the book because I barely remembered it all. And this book reads a lot differently when you're not in high school. I mean, it's a spooky story when you're 15 years old. But when you're an adult with a family and, responsibilities and a home, it becomes a lot more chilling. I mean, I don't have kids, but I have enough nieces and nephews to have been more upset by this book than I was when I was much younger. It's definitely not my favorite Stephen King book. There are Stephen King books I like a lot more, but this one is profoundly upsetting and got under my skin in ways it did not when I read it, all those years ago. And I'm surprised by what a slow burn it is. It takes a very long time for King to pull the trigger on a lot of the horror in this book. But when he does, it feels like he's vividly describing his own nightmares in a way that I feel like not all of his books capture. I feel like I'm really looking into somebody's psychosis, and I really hope the new movie captures that because it's very, very unsettling read, and far more so than I remember. So that's Pet Sematary by Stephen King. And I've barely started it, no room to really talk about it yet. But the next book is Wolf in White Van by John Darnielle, who's actually the lead singer-songwriter for The Mountain Goats. And this book was gifted to me by a friend who recommended it to me highly. And I know it's vaguely science fiction, I believe. But other than that, I'm looking forward to seeing what this book reads like because John Darnielle is a brilliant lyricist. I'm not the biggest Mountain Goats fan in the world, no expert, but I really, really like what I've heard, and I think he's a brilliant songwriter. So very curious to see what a novel written by him reads like. But other than books, I've been really working my way through my backlog of comics. I have a really bad habit of hitting the comic shop every week, reading a few things, and putting the rest of my to-read stack and saying, yeah, I'll catch up when I get a chance. So my catch-up pile was about 2 feet tall, stacked of comics. So I brought most of them on my trip, and I've been reading through a lot of them, stuff I recommended on the show before, stuff that I have no need to really shout from the rooftops right now. But there's a few newish series that I would like to recommend both to our listeners and to the rest of the Slash Film crew. Stuff that is, more well-known, stuff that's really, really, niche. I want to start with a series called Murder Falcon, which is a very silly name, written by Daniel Warren Johnson, and I believe he also draws it. But I don't even know how to begin to describe this comic because it has no right to work as well as it does. The basic premise is that the main character is a heavy metal musician guitarist who's reeling from the death of a loved one. In the first issue does not make it clear if it's a girlfriend, but it seems to be that way, or a wife. He's recently broken up with his band. He's in a really rough time, and monsters are invading the Earth, and that's been happening for some time. And he learns that his music gives power to an alternate dimensional being, a bird-like warrior named Murder Falcon, who's powered by heavy metal. So it ends up being this. It looks like a Mike Mignola comic, like from Hellboy, with these giant monsters invading Earth. But it has this Tenacious D-esque love for heavy metal and music. But the relationship between Murder Falcon and the sky, and the relationship between him and his friends, and his memories of his girlfriend who passed away, it's all very Richard Linklater-like. So it has all these things that have no right to blend together, somehow working in unison. I'm kind of in love with it. is so unique and special and heartwarming and strange. That's Murder Falcon, being published by Image Comics. I think it's 4 or 5 issues in now. Only read the first one, but I really, really loved it. I also want to recommend Outer Darkness. This is the new series from John Layman, who recently finished writing Chew, and the art's by Hoai-Tran. And the basic gist of this is, what if Star Trek met The Exorcist? Where it's basically spaceship adventures. Except in space, there are ghosts and demons everywhere. So the ship is staffed with exorcists and people who know the occult. And it has this very sort of Cartoon Network style art design. So it looks like it would be for kids, but it's incredibly violent and horror driven and a lot of fun. Surprisingly funny, very clever, and really good if you like science fiction horror and a blend of the two. I want to recommend Bone Parish, written by Cullen Bunn with art by Jonas Scharf. This is from Boom Studios. And the basic gist is this: it's a crime story set in New Orleans where a family has discovered a new drug they make from the ashes of the dead. And using a combination of science and voodoo, they can let people experience the lives of people who have died by having them ingest their remains. And even though there's this huge supernatural angle, it involves talking to ghosts and supernatural stuff going on, it's really this crime story about the battle for the New Orleans drug trade of this supernatural drug. And so far, it's very creepy and very good and very very straightforward as a crime story, but in the same way that people would have a someone who steps in to say, "Hey, I'm the expert on being a criminal. Here's my advice." They have dead people advising them that they can talk to them from beyond the grave. It's very good. I recommend it. That's about 6 or 7 issues in. I also want another Boom Studios comic, Black Badge by Matt Kint, with art by Tyler Jenkins. This is a what-if scenario. What if there was a secret branch of the Boy Scouts that taught young boys how to be black ops agents so they can infiltrate other nations disguised as Boy Scouts and commit acts of espionage for the United States. It is... it takes a little while to get going. It took me a few issues to get on board. I was reading it for the creative team and having faith, and it really starts delivering in the past few issues. So it's worth the investment. It really builds a good mystery. It really builds an interesting world, and I'm really interested to see all the details that come out of it. Criminal is back. Criminal from Ed Brubaker and artist Sean Phillips. Criminal's been going on for quite some time. But it's never been an ongoing monthly series until now. And this is essentially crime noir stories told in an interconnected universe where each story stands alone. But if you read them all, you can see how they share characters and share relationships. And the first 2 issues are spectacular. Ed Brubaker and Sean Phillips made my favorite writer-artist team working today. And reading Criminal monthly is going to be incredible. I'm so excited that this is going to keep happening.
By the way, when is Criminal going to be turned into a TV show?
Oh, I have no idea, Peter. I know that the first story in Criminal was being adapted into a movie a long time ago with Brubaker writing the screenplay, but nothing ever came of it. So I think TV may be the right way to do it because you can do all these various arcs that can be essentially be an anthology series with 2 or 3 episodes following one character, then 2 or 3 following another character. Episodes set in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and modern day. It's so sprawling. It has if True Detective was as good as it was at all times, it would be as good as Criminal. Speaking of this, Peter, have you heard of the comic series Die?
I have not.
I'm going to recommend you read Die. This is from Kieran Gillen, who wrote Wicked and the Divine and a lot of other comics. He's writing Star Wars right now as well, with art by Stephanie Hans. And the basic gist of this, and this is an incredible comic after 3 issues, is 6 kids vanish while playing a role-playing game in the 90s and reappear 5 years later. But one of them is missing, and they refuse to talk about it. Then decades pass, and when they're all middle-aged, and they get warped back into the game they were suddenly trapped in decades ago. And the revelation is that the RPG they were playing is magical in some way, and they were literally trapped in this actual fantasy world and forced to escape, and it took them years. But it's incredibly complex in its character and its world design, and the idea being that these middle-aged men and women are now trapped in bodies of characters they created when they were teenagers. So it's very much about, dealing with your nostalgia, confronting who you were as a kid, having a midlife crisis while in the body of the heroic hero you created when you were, at your prime of being a teenager. and I am fascinated by it. It's fascinated in how games work and how games are designed, but also without losing its attention to detail for character. And issue 3 is an extended riff on Tolkien in a way that was very surprising. This is not like traditional elves and orcs fantasy. It's very much a very almost like a Mad Max meets the Matrix type fantasy world. And the way it like confronts the themes of Tolkien in issue 3 blew me away. But Peter, you need to pick up the issues for this, because Kieran Gillen writes essays at the end of each issue where he talks about how game design and games influences writing, and how he makes decisions for characters and story beats based on the games he's played. I think you'd really, really enjoy this.
I've just purchased it on Comixology, so I will be reading this.
All right. I'm going very long on this, so I'm going to rush through the last two. Bitter Roots, David F. Walker, Chuck Brown, and Sanford Green are the writers and artists on this. They're all black men, which is very unusual for any comic. And Bitter Root is about a family who spent generations battling demons that take hold of humans when they become completely overwhelmed by racist feelings. It is not subtle, but it's extremely stylish, extremely fun, and it's really, really fantastic to see. I think this is the Black Panther Get Out effect of these black creators finally realizing, hey, we can tell black stories about black characters and with stories that are actually about race and don't shy away from it, while also being a really kick-ass action comic. So that's a Bitter Root. And finally, the new Buffy the Vampire Slayer comic from Boom Studios. It's very strange because Dark Horse has been publishing sequel comics to Buffy for years. They've been season 8, season 9, season 10, comic runs that continue the story and see the characters grow up. This is a complete reboot. Goes back to the very first Buffy story, and it even uses actor likenesses. All the actors look like they're actors they were in the 90s, but it's now modern day. Buffy's 16 again, but there are smartphones. Like the first issue, she meets Willow and Xander, but it's all 2019. And I don't know how I feel about it yet. The first issue was fun, but I'm very, very concerned that's going to be like, okay, I'm watching and I'm reading the exact same thing I watched and loved years ago. What's going to be so special about this? What's going to make Buffy feel fresh beyond new technology? And there are a few twists in there. Like there's a character who doesn't show up until season 4, and is a fan favorite, but she's a prominent character in the first issue here. So I think they're remixing Buffy in a major way. And this comic's definitely a curiosity. I don't think it's a must-buy yet, but if you're a fan of the show, it's going to be something you probably want to at least take a look at. And for the record, our writer is Jordi Belair, artist is Dan Mora, and Josh Whedon's name's on the cover, but I don't think he has much to do with the actual creation of the comic. I think it's mostly going to be these guys. But it's Jordi Belair, I believe, is a woman. But so far it captures the show quite well. I'm looking forward to seeing more.
We will list all these comics and books in the show notes because there's too many to round up here. But one thing I have learned is when Jacob is watching dogs at his mom's, he has a lot of time to read, apparently.
Too much time, Peter.
Yeah. Ichi, what have you been reading?
I finished reading Dracula finally, and I don't have much to add beyond my initial consensus. Yeah, it was quite action-packed. I enjoyed it a lot. I actually enjoyed a lot the character of Mina, because I was impressed with how competent and fleshed out she was, as opposed to what I kind of initially thought she would be sort of a more passive character, but she ends up playing a pretty large part in the latter half of the book. And I enjoyed that, and kind of her dynamic with Jonathan Harker, who's kind of almost damsel-y in this. And I feel like there's speaking of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, I feel like there's sort of a template laid down there where the woman is sort of the more assertive one, and the man is prone to fits of hysteria almost, which I found really interesting. I do think at the end there are like a lot of false starts, I guess you would say, where I thought like it would be the final climactic battle, and then like, no, wait, they're going to go back and just like regroup and figure out what they're going to do next. And then there's another battle, but it's not really a battle because nothing happens. So I found I was a little frustrated by that, but I liked the book a lot, and I was really happy to finish that so I could get started on Dune, which I bought when I was at the Powell bookstore in Portland 2 weeks ago. That's the largest independent bookstore, in the U.S., and that was really cool to explore because it was like at least a block large, and I bought Dune when I was there, and I've started reading it, and I think I'm only like 20 pages in so far, but I'm really liking it. It's much more fantasy, like epic fantasy than I anticipated, because I always kind of saw it and approached it as a sci-fi book. And while there are sci-fi elements, it's on the planet and everything, I think it's distinctly like fantasy first, which I'm enjoying a lot. That's the genre that is my catnip, as you would say.
Yeah. Ben, what have you been reading?
I also have been reading a fantasy book. It's called The Name of the Wind. It's by Patrick Rothfuss, and it is the first in the King Killer Chronicle trilogy. Only the first 2 books have been published so far. The third one has not come out yet. But this property is being adapted by Lin-Manuel Miranda, who created Hamilton, into a couple different properties. First of all, Showtime is working on a prequel TV show that's set a generation before the events of this book. And then they're also working on Lin-Manuel Miranda is executive producing that and creating some music for it as well. And then they're also doing a live-action feature film, and that's going to be more of a traditional adaptation of this first book in the trilogy. So I knew about this project, and I was sort of curious about it, so I just dove into the book without really knowing much about the actual plot of it. I just heard that it was a really great fantasy novel, and it turned out to be pretty good. I mean, I like I said, I didn't really know what to expect. It's set in a world full of magic and wizards and things like that. So it's very like hardcore fantasy, and I enjoyed that. I haven't read a book like that in a long time, and the plot basically follows this kid who is named Kvothe, Kvothe, and he's basically the chosen one, like that kind of level. He's like a genius who is able to pull off, these feats of magic at an age that nobody else has been able to do. And his family is murdered in the beginning of the book, and it reminded me a little bit of Harry Potter, actually, because the structure of the book is that it tracks his origin story and how he became known to be this sort of fearsome wizard throughout the land. And a lot of it takes place at this university in this fictional country that he lives in. And so there's like rivalries and romance and stuff like that all is sort of under the umbrella of this university. So I wasn't expecting that to be like the primary setting of this book, but it certainly is, and it's very good. I would recommend it. I think I have some nitpicks, like the author is not great at writing female characters, and also if this lead character is supposed to be such a genius, he makes some really boneheaded moves and decisions, and like there are conclusions that he should draw instantly that he does not for some reason, and the book and the author go way out of their way to point out how super smart this guy is, but then he's just sort of pretty dense when it comes to making logical leaps that like the reader automatically knows where the author is going, but his genius lead character, it takes several pages for him to come to that same conclusion. So those are largely nitpicks in what is a pretty good book, and it's called The Name of the Wind.
Very cool. Let's move on to what we've been watching. I think I mentioned last week on the Watercooler I saw Captain Marvel, and I gave a reaction at that time. I got the chance to see it again, and I wanted to see this movie again, not because I loved it so much, but I came out of the first screening of it really. I really did enjoy it a lot. And when I came out of that screening, usually outside a press screening, like, your friends who are also colleagues, like, will gather and you'll talk about, what you think about a movie. And a lot of the people I was talking to were not did not love Captain Marvel. I mean, one person I talked to said it was, quote, Thor the Dark World level of bad. So, not that influences me, but that did make me think, like, was I missing something? Like I don't know. I really, it does take a little bit to get going. It takes like 20, 30 minutes to kind of kick in, but like, I really enjoyed it a lot. So I went, I got to see it second time with my friend John, who is a huge Marvel fan. That's another reason to see it, because he wanted to see it early. I enjoyed it even more the second time. I do. It does take some while to get started. I do think that Lashana Lynch, it's one of the best female performances that we've seen in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Ben Mendelsohn as the villain is just great. I'm not going to go on about this because I know other people here have seen this movie. So I'm going to throw this to Chris. You are generally the person on this podcast that I think enjoys Marvel films the least. What did you think of Captain Marvel?
This film, like 96% of all Marvel films, is fine. That's the very definition of fine. I didn't hate it. I had fun watching it. I probably won't watch it again. The script is really, really clunky, and the direction is really flat. And I really wish Marvel would learn how to light their movies, because I'm sick of this like hallway lighting all their films are shot in. But the cast is so good. I really like what Brie Larson is doing here. She's essentially doing like a 2-hour impression of every young Harrison Ford performance, and I found that really just amusing and endearing, and I just liked watching her do that. Ben Mendelsohn, as you said, is great. Samuel L. Jackson is like as lively as he's been in a very long time in this, and the de-aging effects on him look flawless.
I'm convinced that Disney has invented the time machine, and they're using this time machine not for financial gains, but to go back in time and steal actors when they're younger, to bring them in for a couple weeks to film, roles in their movies.
It's weird because he looks great, but Clark Gregg as Coulson doesn't look as great, and also there are a lot of effects in this which just don't look finished. Like the entire last act where Captain Marvel is like flying around space, she just looks like a cartoon. There's a shot where like they zoom in on her face, and it's very clearly not like the real Brie Larson. It's clearly like a CGI face, and I was like, Jesus, why did they go so close on this shot? Because that's really distracting. So I don't understand why Samuel L. Jackson's de-aging looks perfect and everything else does not. My only guess is they had a lot to reference with him because he's been acting for so long, and there are so many films that he's in when he's younger. So I guess they just had better references on how to make him look young. That's the only thing I could figure out as to why he looks so good.
There's also like the problem with the hairline with Clark Gregg, that I feel like we're so used to seeing him with the receding hairline, not to be rude in any way to Clark Gregg, but I feel like it's weird seeing him with a less receding hair. It almost seems like fake.
Like we're not used to it. But other than that, it's fun. It's a fun movie. It's too long, like all Marvel movies, but I definitely did not. It's nowhere near Thor: The Dark World bad, as that person said. So it's enjoyable.
HT, what did you think?
I'm somewhere in between you and Chris. I think that the Thor: The Dark World comparison is ridiculous because this is a fun, if formulaic movie. I think it suffers a lot from having to abide by that Marvel formula, and it kind of tries to buck that trope a little bit and like throw a few more things in. It tells a little bit of a nonlinear story because it throws us in like kind of midway through Carol Danvers' origin story with like some flashbacks that are told in a very kind of a unique, almost like surreal way, which I enjoyed. But yeah, I think that the direction was lacking a lot, not just in the lighting and the CG, but in just kind of the action sequences, which I found really uninspired. I felt like they were on autopilot for a lot of the action scenes, and it felt like a lot of times, I think this is sort of a common thing, especially with when Marvel hires like independent directors, they don't quite have a grasp on how to do the big blockbuster action sequences and tend to throw that to like the second units who have that technical expertise but don't quite have like the creative vision that these kind of sequences should have, especially when there are needle drops everywhere. Yeah. I found that kind of disconcerting. I was just like, this feels like this sequence should be more fun to watch with this song playing.
Yeah.
For example.
I do agree that the action isn't that great. And also, I was disappointed by the score from Marvel's first female composer as well. Ben, what? Oh, you
Oh,
had
I just
more to
wanted
say?
to
Sorry.
add a few more things because I feel like I just tore through it a little bit, but
Yeah.
I really liked Brie Larson in this. I think she's so funny and sharp and acerbic, and yet she has like this nice vulnerability to her that I think is a little bit under the surface, but it does come through. And I like that she kind of has a full range of just emotion and an arc in this movie that is well done. And I feel like, and I do like the pacing too. I think that unlike Chris, I thought this was very brisk and well paced, and I didn't really feel its 2 hour and 12-minute runtime. But yeah, Brie Larson's great. Samuel Jackson's great. I love everything that Ben Mendelsohn is doing. He is just over the top. He's the only one I think in this movie who knows that he's in a movie about blue aliens fighting reptiles. So
Yeah.
I really enjoyed everything he was doing. And Goose, of course, which I forgot to talk about in my review, but Goose was also a great highlight of this film.
How could you forget Goose?
I know.
Goose is like one of the highlights of this movie.
I know. I just got so excited talking about Ben Mendelsohn that I forgot about Goose.
Ben, what did you think of Captain Marvel?
I think HT pretty much said everything that I was going to say. I fully agree with all of that. I think, I agree with almost all of what all of you guys have said. I think it's like, even Chris, I sort of agree that the movie looks sort of visually bland at times and sort of homogenized. There was one scene in the very beginning with Jude Law and Brie Larson on like this space train that had this really, really cool lighting setup where it was like neon and there was like reds and purples, and I was like, wow, this movie is going to look amazing. Like at least the space stuff is going to look awesome. And then that's really like the most visually interesting scene in the movie, and it comes like 2 minutes in. But I thought the rest of it was like functional, like well done. It's not my favorite Marvel movie, but all of those elements that you guys pointed out is how I feel about it. I love the performances. I thought the essence of what Brie Larson was doing, it was really great. Like, we haven't seen that in a Marvel movie before. We haven't seen like a female friendship like what she has with Lashana Lynch's character in a Marvel movie before, and that's really nice to see.
I was going to say, we haven't seen a female to female relationship in almost any way in a Marvel movie. Like, I was talking with
my wife about that last night, and she brought up Black Panther, and that's like a little bit different, but I mean, at least it's two female characters talking about the world and their place in it, and that happens in this movie. But yeah, it just felt like more of a lived-in relationship between Carol Danvers and is it Maria Rambeau, her character?
Yeah.
She's always wearing a necklace that says Monica on it, and that's her daughter's names, but I got confused. I'm like, are you wearing a necklace that has your name on it, or what's going on? So anyway, Captain Marvel, pretty good.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with all that. I also over the weekend rewatched Iron Man 2, and I know everybody's screaming at their iPhones right now, being like, why?
I'm screaming too, Peter. It's a bad move. Bad.
Yeah, the last time I saw this movie, I think, was in theaters, and I remembered enjoying it somewhat. I knew then it wasn't great, but I didn't think it was as bad as everybody said it was. And when I showed Kitra all the Marvel movies, when I met her, she had only seen Guardians of the Galaxy. So we went through almost all the Marvel movies, but we skipped Iron Man 2, and we skipped Incredible Hulk. And we were looking for a movie to watch over the weekend, and Iron Man 2 was one of those tiles on the screen, so we clicked on it and ended up watching that. And you know what? The movie is a lot worse than I remember it being. First of all, it looks like a movie. Like, it's weird because it, like, like when you were in the 90s and you'd look at a movie in the 80s and it looked like a movie from the 80s? Like, this movie looks like a movie from a different time. Like, I'm not sure if it's that it was shot on film or what. I don't know. There's something just weird about it. There's the jokes. Like, in the first, 20 minutes of the movie, I think, or maybe it's longer than that, but, at one point, Tony Stark pees in his suit as Iron Man, and he makes a joke about jerking off in the Senate hearing. And this is clearly before Disney, the rights went over to Disney completely. This is a different time. I do like the Stark Expo, Walt Disney inspired stuff, but it just seems like such a mess. Like, this movie is just like a mess of ideas that Jon Favreau was working with. Obviously, he was interested in, you know, a fast car race, and he wanted to have Whiplash show up there, and it doesn't really make much sense. And I don't know, a lot of it just doesn't make much sense. It's a jumble of ideas. I still don't think it's the worst Marvel Cinematic Universe movie, but it is a gigantic mess, for sure.
The movie's biggest crime is wasting Sam Rockwell that early in the MCU for that role that just never really comes back and never really has much of a real impact on things.
Yeah, there's no excuse for that. You're right. Chris, what have you been watching?
My wife and I burned through the Amazon series Lorena over the weekend. It's about Lorena Bobbitt, who, of course, in the 90s, cut her husband's penis off and threw it out the window. And I remember that happening in the 90s when I was a kid. I remember it just being this huge, you know, tabloid story, and it was obviously parodied in that Weird Al song. It just became this big cultural thing, and I only knew I knew the basic gist of the story for years but I didn't really know the details. And this documentary, it's a 4 episodes, it's a docu-series, really impressed me because it breaks down everything, and it's weird how or I guess weird isn't the right word. It's depressing how much the events in this movie tie into pretty much stuff that's going on today. Like, without ever coming right out and mentioning the Me Too movement, this is very much something that fits in with that, because it's really about how her husband was just this abusive monster, and he more or less just got away with that because everyone just looked at her as, you know, this crazy woman who cut her husband's penis off. And it really goes into how terrible the media treated her, and Howard Stern is just constantly mocking her, and Howard Stern actually raised money for her husband in a fundraiser. It just makes everyone look really just terrible and shitty because they just destroyed this woman's credibility and life because of, you know, this one action. Now, I'm not going to condone violence and say she was right to do what she did, but it makes a pretty good case that, you know, in the end she was, you know, the quote unquote right one, and this guy was just a complete piece of shit. And it's just fascinating to me how the media twisted that and how they're basically still doing that. The moral of the movie is nothing has really changed, which is a very depressing moral, but I really liked watching this overall.
Yeah, I watched only the first episode of this, and I kind of got the idea of what it was going for and how it was kind of like the OJ thing, kind of using, an event from the past to talk about even the now. And I don't know, I'm just not sure. Was there really enough there for 4 episodes?
Yes, I think there is.
Really?
It's actually it never overstays its welcome. It's the perfect amount of episodes, because the first episode covers, you know, the event, and then the next 2 episodes are all about her trial, and then the last episode is a wrap up. So I think it's really well spaced.
Okay, what else have you been watching? And that's on Amazon?
Yeah, it's on Amazon Prime. And I also watched The Guilty, which is a Danish thriller from, I think it's from last year, maybe the year before. It was from 2018. It's on Hulu right now. This is one of those films, it takes place entirely in one location. It's about this, it's not 911, it's whatever they have in, you know, overseas, but he's basically a dispatcher, and he gets a call from this woman, and she's been kidnapped by her ex-husband. And so the whole movie is about him trying to, you know, save her life. And, it's not easy to make a movie set in one place and make it seem cinematic, but this movie does a really great job of it. It's exciting and nerve-wracking, and they keep introducing really unexpected twists every half hour that knock you on your ass and you're not really expecting them. So it's just a really clever, well-written, well-acted movie. So if you have Hulu and you haven't seen this, I'd recommend checking it out.
And that's
I just want to add, this played at Fantastic Fest last year, where it won the runner-up audience award. It was a huge smash there. So even though I haven't seen it, I can vouch for people loving the hell out of this movie.
So that's The Guilty. It's on Hulu. Jacob, in addition to reading Pet Sematary, you also went back and rewatched the original Pet Sematary?
Yeah, the 1989 movie, and it's maybe a controversial thing to say, but I think it's kind of a bad movie. Maybe it's because it's unfair because I
It's
watched
definitely a bad movie.
I watched it the day I finished the book, and even though Stephen King wrote the screenplay, the whole thing just feels like it's been gutted of everything that made the book so powerful. Even before it gets to the supernatural stuff, which isn't very well pulled off, with some very bad puppet work in the final stretch. It just strips out so much of the dread. It strips out so much character. Judd Crandall, the elderly neighbor across the street, maybe Stephen King's best character on the page, has all the stuff that makes him great cut. He just is now an exposition device in the movie. The performances, all around aren't that great. The whole thing just feels like it's on fast forward. It loses all the dread. It loses all of the personality and the specificity that makes the book so uncomfortable and gives me that made me dread turning the pages while I was reading the final stretch of it. And it's a real bummer of a thing. Mary Lambert, who directed it, she was most known at the time for doing Madonna music videos, but she doesn't really bring much style to it. There's no real rhythm to it. Nothing about this movie stands out, and nothing about it feels personal. And it even cuts the scariest stuff from the book. There's stuff involving the walk to the burial ground where the main character encounters supernatural forces. Both walks to it in the book, one near the beginning, one near the end, feature concepts, imagery, and descriptions of sound that stayed with me and are currently with me, and they're essentially gone from the movie. And I feel like why of all the things that Stephen King could have cut when he adapted his own book did he cut the things he cut? And it's not just the horror stuff; it's character moments, it's character development. I feel like he misunderstood what made his own work so powerful. And Chris, I know this is your favorite King book. I gotta know, do you like this movie?
It might be nostalgia because I grew up with it, but I do like the movie. It's nowhere near the book. As you said, the book is definitely my favorite King book, and I'm so excited for this new movie. And this one is not anywhere close to what makes the book great. But there's just stuff in it that sticks out to me. All the stuff with Zelda in this movie, I still find particularly creepy, like the way it's shot in this like fisheye lens sort of way. And I don't know, I just think the movie is so oppressively depressing, and they don't make a lot of movies like that. And the fact that they got away with a lot of the stuff they got away with impresses me. But I would never say it's anywhere near as good as the book.
All right, that's streaming on Amazon Prime if you want to check out that, and the sequel, Pet Sematary 2, which I have not seen.
You guys are putting me in a really tough spot here because I've had the original movie on my DVR for months, and I've been waiting until it gets a little closer to the new one before I decide to check it out. It would be my first time watching it, and now I'm torn about whether or not I should just skip the 89 movie altogether. Sounds like Jacob doesn't like it, but Chris does. I don't know what to do here.
Read the book. That's the best option. It's actually one of King's shorter books. It's under 400 pages, and it reads fast. So I would honestly recommend that to be your best route if you had the time, Ben.
Okay.
I watched two other horror movies that are probably less interesting to talk about, at least. I watched He's Out There, a 2018 slasher film directed by Quinn Lasher. And this stars Yvonne Strahovski from Handmaid's Tale on Hulu. And this is a perfectly adequate slasher movie. It is a movie where a masked man has a woman and her two daughters trapped in their country cabin. And the movie is, how will they escape? Will they escape alive? Will the people who walk by the vicinity get killed? The answer to that last question is yes. It is fine. It is a totally adequate beer and pretzels slasher movie. Does nothing unique, but it gets the job done in ways I was surprised by. I was expecting trash, and I got something reasonably okay. So that's streaming on Netflix. It's also very short. And finally, I watched The Uninvited. This was one of those 2 a.m. on a Saturday night decisions like, what do I want to watch that I don't care too much about because I don't want to go to sleep yet. And The Uninvited was a 2009 horror movie directed by the Guard brothers. And I realized 5 minutes in, oh, wait, I've seen this before because I had seen the original film is based on A Tale of Two Sisters, the Kim Ji-woon South Korean horror movie. And The Uninvited takes what makes A Tale of Two Sisters so compelling and Hollywoodizes it very much. It makes it less complex. It shaves off the rough edges. It adds a lot of cheap jump scares. And the basic gist of the movie is a girl returns home from a state mental institution after her mother passes away in a tragic fire. And you start to suspect that her father's new girlfriend is responsible for Mo's murder and may have more murder on the mind. Mystery unfolds. Honestly, The Uninvited is streaming on Netflix. It's 87 minutes long, and it's okay if you probably haven't seen the original movie. But if you can hunt down A Tale of Two Sisters and don't mind the subtitles, and I hope you don't because you're a movie fan and deal with it, the Kim Ji-woon South Korean version is so much better. So seek that out instead.
And where can we see that?
If you want to see The Uninvited, it's on Netflix. I'm not so sure where A Tale of Two Sisters is streaming or if it is, but it is worth seeking out.
Okay, cool. HJ, besides Captain Marvel, what else have you been watching?
I got the chance to see a Vietnamese action flick called Furie. So this is a film that makes the case that Vietnam may be the next country to watch for sleek Asian action cinema. It's a vengeance thriller about a mother whose daughter gets kidnapped, and this mother is a former gang leader who, wreaks all hell upon the kidnappers and fights her way through this whole conspiracy of a child trafficking ring. And it stars Veronica Ngo, who, for those who don't know, played Paige Tico in Star Wars The Last Jedi. And Veronica Ngo is a star in this movie. She is just so dynamic and compelling and emotional. And I actually really like that this film, despite being sort of like taken for women, allows her to be emotional and vulnerable. There are parts where she kind of just like breaks down crying a lot because she is so distressed over her missing daughter. And the film takes its time to build the relationship between Veronica Ngo's character and her daughter. And it's really good. It makes the most of sort of its more low budget, low key sequences. It looks incredibly sleek despite having a lot of sequences that, for example, take place on like a moped or something like that. It's very good. I highly recommend checking this out because it's just like kind of what you see a lot with a lot of like South Korean or what other countries are like really into I like other Asian sort of like action cinema, and I enjoyed watching this in theaters quite a lot. It's in select U.S. theaters now, and it is don't have a lot of experience with like other Vietnamese films. I'm not really familiar with a lot of Vietnamese cinema, but this kind of purports that like there's a good promise for the Vietnamese movie business.
For sure. And you've been watching some romantic K-dramas?
Yes. So this is something where I'm just going to talk about by myself for a little bit because it's a very niche thing, and I'm sure none of you have watched any K-dramas. But I'm going to talk about two K-dramas in particular because they kind of come hand in hand. They both premiered at the same time, and they're both about 8 episodes in. The first is called Touch Your Heart, and that stars Lee Dong-wook and Yoon Na. And the second is called Romance is a Bonus Book, and that's currently airing on Netflix. It stars Lee Jong-suk and Lee Na-young. So Touch Your Heart is a sort of unofficial sequel to this other drama that I absolutely adore. And I don't know if I talked about this on the Watercooler podcast, but I've definitely written about this on our Watercooler back when we were writing our Watercooler articles. And that drama was called Goblin. That was a fantasy drama in which Lee Gong Yu, who starred in Train to Busan, played an immortal figure, a goblin who was cursed with immortality after having in medieval Korea killed thousands of people. The only way for his curse to be lifted is for a person who is born to be the goblin's bride to pull out this sort of mystical sword out of his chest. Anyways, it's a romantic slash fantasy slash action drama, and in this drama there's a supporting couple played by Lee Dong-wook and Yoo-na, and they have an incredibly tragic and just grief-stricken love story, and their chemistry was so good and so palpable that they became kind of the fan favorites of the people who watched Goblin, and Goblin was kind of this huge phenomenon in Korea as well as internationally. So cut to a year later, and Lee Dong-wook and Yoo-na are starring in a new drama that's unrelated to Goblin, but it basically plays like Goblin fan fiction for everyone who's just really sad that their characters met such a tragic ending in Goblin. So Touch Your Heart is just the fluffiest, cheesiest, most corny drama ever, but I'm enjoying every minute because it is starring these two people who have incredible chemistry with each other, it's about an actress who has is kind of washed up after a drug scandal derails her career, and in order for her to make her comeback in this big law drama, she has to work for 3 months at a law firm, and she is working as assistant for Lee Dong-wook's character, who is a taciturn, closed-off lawyer, and of course they fall in love, and it's great and cheesy, and I absolutely adore it. There is no substance at all to this drama, but it's like the equivalent of like snorting a bunch of sugar. It's ridiculous and so fun to watch. And it's currently airing on Viki right now. It's 8 episodes in. I'm enjoying it a lot. And on the other side of the cheesy romance dramas is the Netflix drama Romance is a Bonus Book, which has slightly more substance to its story. It's about a divorced 37-year-old woman who's trying to get back into the job field, and is finding that with her qualifications, she's just being shut out of like all her interviews, and she's basically homeless and living out of her childhood friend's attic without his knowledge. And she ends up taking a job and lying about her on a resume about having a college career, and just like starting off with just like a high school resume. And she gets a job at his work. And it's a fun sort of younger man, older woman romance dynamic. And it's something that I'm actually happy to see is sort of becoming a trend in K-dramas, where usually you see like much younger women with much older men. And with this and following up the drama Something in the Rain, which I talked about, I think, a couple episodes before, like last year, it seems like there's more of a comeback for like these older female characters who are being romanced by younger men. And I'm enjoying that trend a lot, even if there is very little substance in these dramas. But I'm enjoying this one, not quite as much as Touch Your Heart, because Romance is a Bonus Book. The leads don't have quite the chemistry, but it's a lot of fun, and the premise is really promising just because it's different sort of workplace drama than your usual workplace drama. But yeah, I have I'm not sure if I'll finish these dramas. I have often, with K-dramas especially, my problem with them is that they often get redundant and or just overwrought in a lot of ways. I've tweeted about this. I actually prefer Japanese dramas a lot more to K-dramas, just because K-dramas last so long and they really hammer in a lot of the plot lines and tend to get a lot more soapy, whereas J-dramas actually adapt a lot of mangas or animes and have a much wider range of genres. They don't always go for the romance, but they tend to do a lot of comedy, some raunchy comedy, some coming of age stuff. And it's a lot more diverse and often only 10 episodes long, which I like. Whereas for K-dramas, you often get like 16 to 22 episodes. That's too much for me sometimes. And so I don't know if I'll finish these, but I'm enjoying these for now. And it's just kind of a nice like reprieve for me from all the stress of the world.
See some dog reviews and some education on the world of K-dramas, all in one episode.
Speaking of Korean cinema, I looked it up, and A Tale of Two Sisters is streaming on Shudder. So there's no need to watch The Uninvited. You can go watch A Tale of Two Sisters on Shudder instead.
Cool. Ben has outdone all of us. He's watched more things this week than all of us combined. Ben, what have you been watching?
Well, I'm trying to watch one movie every day. Like I decided that I want to try to do that in 2019 because last year I just didn't see as many movies overall as I wanted to. And I'm also trying to sort of boost my education of older movies and world cinema and all sorts of stuff. So that's why you heard me a lot this year talking about a ton of movies on TCM, because I'm just like filling up my DVR with old movies, classic movies that I've never seen before. And one of them that I watched this week is called Top Hat. It is the best known work of Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers. This came out in 1935, and that's where I watched it on TCM. It is sort of like HT was talking about. It's a romance. It's like a screwball romance musical comedy kind of thing. And there's like all of the tropes of modern I guess they don't really make modern romantic comedies in the same way anymore, but all of the classic tropes of romantic comedies are there. There's like this big case of mistaken identity, which I feel like happens in, every fourth romantic comedy. There's like some sort of, like comical level of confusion that where the entire thing could easily be could be like straightened out if somebody would just sit down and have like a 2-minute conversation with somebody else, like laying out exactly what happens. But it turns out that most people, the characters are on the wrong page for the entire movie, and that's really the drama. That's what you're waiting for, is for this conflict to be resolved. Is like all it needs is this tiny explanation, and then everything will be fine. And that's very much what happens in Top Hat. I had never seen any Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers movies before. And
I recommend Swing Time. That's a really great one.
Yeah, that one is another of, I think it's Top Hat and Swing Time are like their two biggest ones as far as I know from the little research that I've done about it. There's tons of dance sequences in here, all of which are really great. I mean, that's the thing that I was most surprised about with this, and just to keep it short, is that I went into this expecting the dancing to be amazing and the acting to just be passable, but I really like the presences and the personalities of both Astaire and Rogers as actors, when they're not dancing. So I was very surprised and sort of pleasantly pleased to see, oh, these people are actually like talented actors. They're not just hired to do these, show-stopping dance numbers. So you can check that out if you're interested. Top Hat is available on like YouTube and iTunes and stuff like that if you want to rent that. Guys, I finally did it. I watched The Day of the Dolphin. This is a movie that came out in 1973. It's directed by Mike Nichols. Some of you listening might know it from its ludicrous tagline, which is, unwittingly, he trained a dolphin to kill the president of the United States. And so I was like, how can I not watch this movie? So it finally came on TCM actually also. And I DVR'd the hell out of that thing and watched it. And this movie, despite that tagline, which sort of makes it seem like this pulpy thriller, it's played entirely straight. There is no winking at all in this movie. It reminded me really of like the political thrillers of, I mean, it came out in the early 70s, but like it reminded me of like what you classically think of as the political thrillers of the 1970s. This came out 2 years before 3 Days of the Condor, which is sort of like the jewel in the crown of that subgenre. And it's very much like that in how it treats everything super seriously. And, it's all about, these shady authoritarian organizations who you can't trust, and the plot is about this guy who trains dolphins to communicate with humans by actually teaching them how to speak in English over the course of several years, and then the government or a shady organization coming in to try to convince that dolphin to kill the president. And you never actually see the president in the movie. It's not like it's not that tagline paints it to be a totally different type of movie than it actually is. The president is off screen the whole time, and I'm not going to tell you whether or not he succeeds, but it is a fascinating movie and much more serious and well thought out than that tagline would have you believe. George C. Scott stars in this thing, and it was directed again by Mike Nichols. So
I'm not sure if you know this, but Roman Polanski was originally supposed to direct this movie. He was in England scouting locations when his wife was killed by the Manson family. So,
wow.
So
I had no idea about that.
And Mike Nichols came on board to direct this, basically just to complete a 4-picture deal that he had with the producer. So,
wow. Yeah, man. I can't imagine what Roman Polanski's version of that would look like, but maybe it would have been a little seedier. But this movie is very good. I'm looking for it streaming, and I can't see it anywhere, so maybe check TCM. I'm not sure. It's not on Amazon or YouTube or anything as far as I can tell. Next up, I watched My Dinner with Andre, this 1981 comedy that stars Andre Gregory and Wallace Shawn. They're sort of loosely playing themselves. They're basically playing themselves. And the whole movie is the two guys meet up in a restaurant and they have dinner and they just talk the whole time. I have heard about this movie for years. We're also watching Community, or rewatching Community, and they did a My Dinner with Abed episode, and that's what sort of inspired my wife and I to watch this, because we had never seen My Dinner with Andre. I found this to be a maddening experience because the Andre Gregory the whole time is just talking about existential nonsense, and like the entire thing struck me as like him coming from such a ridiculous place of privilege, trying to talk about the problems that he has in his life. And he's like this rich white guy who like doesn't know what real problems actually are. And I was very frustrated by the movie because Wallace Shawn spends the first 2/3 of it just sort of nodding and asking him to continue and give me more details about this ludicrous story that you're telling. And then he doesn't really interrogate any of the ideas in those stories until the last quarter of the movie or something. And that's when I finally sort of got on board with it, because I was like, at least somebody in this movie is representing my thoughts as an audience member, trying to push back a little bit against the ravings of this madman. So has anybody else here seen My Dinner with Andre?
I saw it a long time ago. I barely remember it.
Yeah,
I saw it in film school when I was making my way through Roger Ebert's book of essay of great movies. And as much as it's one of those things where, like, after reading Ebert's great movies essay, I think you can understand what the intention here is. But it's very much not my thing.
Yeah, I remember Entertainment Weekly picked it as it's like one of the 50 greatest independent films of all time, and I think I watched it around that time, based on that article. I don't remember loving it. There is a bit of trivia here, though. But Lloyd Kaufman of Troma Pictures, who went on to direct The Toxic Avenger, started as a production manager on this film.
Yeah, I saw his name in the credits. I was like, what the hell is Lloyd Kaufman doing working on My Dinner with Andre? It's such a bizarre combo. But this movie it's an hour 51 and it feels like a 3-hour movie. I can't say that I would recommend it.
Yeah. And the other notable thing is for fans of The Princess Bride, the word inconceivable is used in this film 6 years before that.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, as soon as Wallace Shawn said that, my wife and I looked at each other and laughed. Like, you can't not notice it when Wallace Shawn says the word inconceivable. Yeah. So I also watched the first part of Leaving Neverland, which is the 2-part documentary that's on HBO right now about the sexual abuse of 2 men, or alleged sexual abuse of 2 men by Michael Jackson. Chris talked about this, I think, last week, so I'm really not even going to say anything about it, especially since I haven't seen the second part. The second part aired on TV last night when I was at my Captain Marvel screening, so I didn't get a chance to check that out yet. But man, this is a harrowing and really, really disturbing documentary. It's really well done, though, and I think everybody should watch it. So that's available on HBO Go or HBO Now or HBO. I'm sure they're playing it a bunch right now. And then finally, I want to finish with a pair of Naked movies. The Naked Spur, which was from 1953. It's a Western. And then The Naked City, which is from 1948. And it's like a film noir set in New York City. So The Naked Spur, I don't really have much to say. It stars James Stewart and Janet Leigh from Psycho, and Anthony Mann directed this film. It's a Western that is set entirely in like the Rocky Mountains, which I think, or I guess the San Juan Mountains. That's where it was filmed, in Colorado. And the setting alone sort of makes it, I think, worth watching, because I've watched a ton of Westerns, and obviously you think of like Monument Valley and like Western mesas and stuff like that, but the setting here and the idea of these characters just sort of riding through forests and trees and mountains, and there's big rivers and everything. I mean, it's totally unlike the typical Western setting. So, and James Stewart is always great. Janet Leigh's really good in it too. I mean, it's like a fine movie, but I think the setting is the most notable thing about it. So that's called The Naked Spur. That's available on YouTube and iTunes and all of that. And then The Naked City is a movie that I really love, and I would really, it's my first time watching it. I would recommend everybody check this out if you can. It was directed by Jules Dassin, and it stars. Who does it star? It stars Barry Fitzgerald, Howard Duff, Dorothy Hart, and Don Taylor, all of which I had never heard of before this movie. But it's basically just a police procedural that plays out as a film noir from 1948, and I think the production manager narrates the movie. I'd never seen this before. The movie opens with like the production manager or the production designer. I'll have to look. A producer, excuse me, Mark Hellinger narrates the movie. So he addresses the audience directly and says like, hey, as part of the movie, not just like an opening title that before the story begins. It's like, this is the movie opens and the producer of the film identifies himself as such and then speaks to you as the narrator of the movie saying, hey, this is the city of New York. We actually filmed this movie here. There's 8 million stories in this city. Here's one of them, basically. And I'd never seen that approach happen like within the text of the film before. But it's a pretty engrossing police procedural. It's just like a murder mystery story. This model gets murdered one night, and it's about the detectives who are trying to. One of them is an Irish guy played by Barry Fitzgerald, and one of them is just sort of like a street detective, street level guy who's like hitting the pavement and going to do the hard work of like casing the environments and asking people questions and interrogating people and stuff like that. But yeah, it's really good. It's like a it's a film noir, so it's got that voiceover narration all the way through. It's got some really, really fascinating cinematography, and the location stuff, the setting really stands out. I mean, it feels like this movie was shot on the streets of New York with like half the population there being completely unaware that anything was happening around them. So yeah, it's called The Naked City, and that is on iTunes and Amazon Prime right now.
And both of those... Oh, what were you going to say, Jacob?
I just wanted to ask Ben, talk about The Naked Spur. Have you seen McCabe and Mrs. Miller by Robert Altman?
I don't think I have. No, I don't think so.
Because if you like the idea of Westerns set in areas that like really are outside the norm, that is set in 1902 in Washington State.
Oh, wow.
It's the very end of the Western era, and it's about the end of the Western era, but it's all set in the snow and like in mountains of Washington. So if that idea of that kind of story, being subverted in a different location is appealing to you, you should really seek that out.
I will do that. Thank you.
Both of these movies were actually nominated for Best Screenplay and didn't win. But The Naked City won Best Cinematography, which you mentioned it had great cinematography and editing as well. So there you have it. Awesome. Okay, let's move on to what we've been eating. Brad's not here to bring us the bad stuff. So Jacob and I will give you some of the good stuff, or the good for you stuff. I have recently tried Virgil's Cola. I've been drinking Zevia, which is a soda that is sweetened with stevia, and I love that. I love the grape flavor, and I love the black cherry flavor, and I love the root beer flavor. But one of my friends has turned me on to Virgil's Cola, and I particularly like their black cherry flavor. It kind of tastes like a almost like a black cherry cream soda, if that makes sense. And this can be found in healthier supermarkets, and I think it's sweetened with monk fruit or something. Has no carbs, but I like it. Check it out, Virgil's Cola, and it comes in cans and bottles. Jacob, what have you been eating?
I've been eating. I tried for the first time. Good D's brownies. It's not goodies. It's Good D's. GOOD space DEES, and it's part of the brand of keto-friendly baked goods. Pretty much, if you cut the brownies into 12 pieces from the box, once you made them, each brownie will be 1 carb each, and they're good brownies. I mean, they're not as good as the best brownies you've had in your life, but when you're on a diet and you want a brownie, it really gets the job done. I really enjoyed it, And Peter, I believe you talked about Rebel ice cream before on the show, and I managed to have it for the first time, because there's as Texas listeners will know, the major grocery store brand in Texas is H-E-B, and H-E-B started carrying Rebel ice cream, and it is very, very good ice cream. That's only a handful of carbs for the entire pint, and I'm very impressed by it and plan to make it one of my go-to treats whenever I need something sweet, and it's really excellent. And Peter, I want to know how much hate mail do we get for our keto corner here? Do people yell at us for this?
No, I have not gotten one bit of hate mail for our keto corner. Although my friend I went with to Captain Marvel yesterday told me that he fast forwards through the section. So I don't know. We go by this pretty fast, though. I think I also think that these recommendations are not just for people who are doing keto. Like these, like before I was on keto and I was not on a diet, I was eating Halo Top just because it was, the less bad version of ice cream. Even if I wasn't on keto, I'd probably be eating either Halo Top or Rebel. Rebel is, I've given it to people that don't know it's like a diet ice cream. They thought it was normal ice cream. Also, same with Good D's brownies. I'm not, like you said, it's not the best brownies in the world, but they're passable brownies. And Good D's also makes a bunch of blondies and cookies and other stuff that's also very good, and I highly recommend them. But yeah, please don't hate on us for the 3 minutes we spend talking about.
We just want to be healthy.
Yeah,
and we want to share our healthiness with you.
Yes. Okay. I've ordered some keto donuts from somewhere. I'll talk about those next week. I haven't gotten them yet. Okay. Let's move on to what we've been playing. I'm the only one that's been playing stuff this week. I went to a friend's birthday, Lauren's, and she had an escape room in the box. This is one that you can buy, I think, at like Target and mass stores. It's sold by Mattel, I think, makes it. One of the big company makes it. And it's called Escape Room in the Box, the Werewolf Experiment. It's this black box, and you're actually not even supposed to open the box until you start playing, and then you have an hour. Like the premise is that you've been bitten or whatever, and you have an hour to unlock the antidote before you will remain a werewolf forever. So that's the premise. I looked on Board Game Geek before playing this, and a lot of people were complaining that it was too easy. Maybe it's that I haven't played a lot of these escape room in the boxes games, but it took us, I want to say, like an hour and 10 minutes to beat this, which is, as you know, 10 minutes more than the time limit. So I wouldn't say it's easy. I liked it. It has a bunch of lock boxes, a bunch of paper puzzles. I'm not going to ruin some of the surprises, but it goes beyond what I thought it would. I thought it was just going to be like, a couple lock boxes. But there's more interesting things in that box and ways of discovering the clues than I would have expected. I would recommend it. I think it's like $30 on Amazon or something like that. So if you want to spend an hour with, 4 or 5 friends, $30 is not a bad way of doing it. That's Escape Room in a Box, the Werewolf Experiment. Jacob, have you tried that?
Actually, I have not tried any of those escape rooms in a box yet. I've only done, the actual physical You Are There escape rooms. I've always been skeptical of these, but you seem to keep playing them and enjoying them. So maybe I should finally give it a shot.
Yeah, I would recommend it. Okay, that brings us to the end of today's Slash Film Daily. You can find more of all of our work at slashfilm.com. You can find this podcast, Slash Film Daily, published on iTunes, Google Podcasts, Overcast, Spotify, all the popular podcast apps. Please feel free to send your feedback, questions, comments, concerns to us at peter@slashfilm.com. And please head on over to our iTunes page. Give us a 5-star rating. Write us a couple words. Tell your friends. Spread the word. And we'll see you tomorrow. There's no book? Wait, what's
Jacob
going on?
doesn't have the book.
There's a
I was like
long
waiting
silence.
for the Hey Peter, and it didn't happen.
Did you not bring your book with you, Jacob?
Hey, Peter, how could I not bring my book with me when I am traveling? Oh, no, let me find it. It is certainly around me somewhere.
Are you Googling?
No.
Are you Googling bad jokes?
No, I would never Google bad jokes. I would only find the book.
Jacob, I can hear you typing right now.
I'm not typing. That's a dog's nails on the floor of my mom's house. Clickety clack. Hey, Lily, don't jump up. Okay, I found the book. Okay.
Oh, great.
Ben, don't feel bad. There are many people who have no talent.
All right, cutting right to the core.
Wait, what chapter is this from, Jacob?
This is
you know we can't answer that.
the chapter https://www.news24.com/u/archive/really mean insults.
Oh God.
Okay. Let's see if these are any better than the book.
HT, as an outsider, what do you think of the human race?
I guess I'm an alien.
Peter, I like to kick you in the teeth, but why should I improve your looks?
Okay.
Chris, I like you. People say I have no taste, but I like you.
Oh.
I like that one, actually. That one's
Yeah, that
good.
one's fine. I can live with that one.
Yeah.